Welcome back, my dear students. Today we are gonna start a new chapter, the tissues. As we discussed earlier, when we were talking about the introduction to the human body, at that time we discussed the hierarchy of the human organization, and at that time we discussed whenever there are some specialized cell, they combine to form a new structure which was called as the tissues. So basically we will be talking about tissues in this chapter, and as we are dealing with the human anatomy and physiology, so we will be talking only about the tissues which are found in our human body, and we will not be discussing about the other tissues which are found in plants and other organisms. So let's start our chapter. For the tissue, it is, as you are saying, it is called the living fabric. The reason for that is that our complete body is covered from the skin, and skin you will be learning, as we will go further in this chapter. Skin, you will be learning that it is made up of tissues. So it is also called as the living fabric. The tissues are termed as the living fabric also. And as per talking about the technically talking about the tissues, it is when the individual body cells are specialized, and each type of these specialized cells, they perform specific functions that maintain the homeostasis. Then these group of cells which are similar in structure, and they perform the common related functions, that may be any function. And when these group of cells which are similar in structure and commonly performing the same functions, they may be termed as the tissues. And histology, as we earlier discussed, histology is the study of the tissues, and the field of science which deals in study of the tissues is called as a histology. And talking about the human body tissues, there are basically four form of tissues which are found in our human body. That are the epithelial tissue, connective tissue, muscle tissue, and the nervous tissue. And in this chapter particularly, we will be talking about two main type of tissues, that are the epithelial tissue and the connective tissue details. Now, talking in general about nervous tissue, we can see clearly that nervous tissue, its main function is on the communication and the control. So it basically serves the purpose of the internal communication, and mainly it is found throughout our nervous system, which consists of our brain, spinal cord, and the nerves. Then its main function is to convey the message or the electrical impulses from brain towards the body, and from body towards the brain. And then talking about the muscle tissue, we can see that its main function is the contraction, and with the help of the contraction it causes the movement. And basically the muscle tissue is further compiled, and it is divided into three types of muscle tissues. The first part of which is the muscles which are attached to the bones, are called as the skeletal muscles. The second one you are very familiar of, and you have already studied, is the muscles of the heart, which are also called as the cardiac muscles. And the third one is the muscles of the walls of the hollow organs, which our body is having, such as our stomach. It is comprised of the hollow organ. It is mainly considered a hollow organ because food is being broken down into it. So whatever food we consume is first of all filled into the stomach, so it is a hollow organ. So these type of muscle tissue which are found in the hollow organs, it is termed as the smooth muscle tissues. And then the main tissue which we will be discussing in this chapter is the epithelial tissue. It is a major function of the epithelial tissue is that it forms the boundaries between different environments, and it serves as the protection agent, the first line of defense of our human body against the environment and various pathogens. And it also helps in the secretions. It absorbs the various things, and it also serves as the filtration purpose. And mainly you can say, as I already said, that your skin is mainly made up of the epithelial tissue. What type of epithelial tissues, that will be discussed in detail when we move along this chapter. But in general we can say that our skin is made up of the epithelial tissue, and it is the protection or the first line defense of our human body. And all the functions which we have discussed for as per the epithelial tissues, and the skin perform all of the functions. And secondly, it is found into the lining of the digestive tract organs and other hollow organs. The internal lining of such organs are being formed by the epithelial tissue. As we discussed, that it is serving the purpose of secretion and absorption also. So all the internal linings of our digestive tract are comprised of the epithelial tissue. And skin, we already discussed that the epidermis of the skin is made up of the epithelial tissue. Then talking about the connective tissue, the function of the connective tissue is basically it provides the support and protection to a human body. The internal organs and various organ systems are being bind together with the help of this connective tissue, and it serves as a transport purpose also. So connective tissue, it is further divided into the bones, the tendons, and fat and other soft padding cells in the epithelial tissue, which is also called as the epithelium. Generally it is a sheet of cells that covers the body surfaces or the cavities, as we discussed, that it is also forming the internal linings of the various hollow organs. So we can also say that it covers body surfaces or the cavities, and it is having the two main forms, which first we can see that it is forming the function of the covering and lining epithelia. So it is called as the covering and lining epithelia, and it is basically found on the external and internal surfaces. External surfaces, we can say the best example is our skin, and it is the largest organ of human body, and it serves all the purposes we will be discussing, or your ma'am had taught you in the skin chapter. If you still want that chapter to be delivered again, we will prepare the lecture in our further classes. And for the best example of the external covering and lining epithelia is our skin. And when we talk about the internal surfaces, we can see that it is found on the internal lining of digestive system, say for the internal lining of the esophagus, stomach, intestines. All these surfaces of the internal lining of these organs, they are comprised of the covering and lining epithelia. And the next form of this epithelia is called as the glandular epithelia, which is majorly a form of, as you can easily understand from the glandular, okay, it is comprised of the glands, and its major function will be the secretory tissue in the glands. For example, we can say as salivary glands, their major function is to form and secrete the saliva. And as per the function of the epithelial tissue, we can say that its main functions are, as we already also discussed, its main functions are the protection, absorption, filtration, excretion, secretion, and sensory reception. As you have studied in your skin chapter, the sensory reception is being performed by the skin, and also skin performs the function of the secretion by sweat and bile glands. And other functions, we can say that excretion, filtration, absorption, and protection, we will be discussing in details when we go on further. Besides the skin, we can say that the epithelial tissue which is found in the kidney, it is also performing all the major functions, almost the major functions, not all but almost the main functions, like of absorption, filtration, and excretion and secretion. All these functions are also found in the kidney. We'll be discussing in detail about the kidney in our urinary chapter. So depending upon the tissue and which type of cells that tissue is made up of and what is its location, it may perform mainly all of the functions also, and it may perform any single type of function also. So in common, we can say that epithelial tissue is performing all these functions of the protection, absorption, filtration, excretion, secretion, and the sensory reception. Now, when we talk about the characteristics of the epithelial tissue, there are certain main characteristics of the epithelial tissue, and they are the 5 distinguished characteristics. The first one is the polarity, and second is the specialized contacts, as it is contacted by different cells, and third is the supported by the connective tissue. It is being supported by the connective tissues. The fourth one is the avascular. It doesn't have any kind of blood supply in it. It is avascular, and but it is innervated. And the fifth one is it is having the power of regeneration, as you might have learned in your skin chapter, that our skin cells, the topmost layer of the cells, it is continuously being shed after a few days, and the new cells are being replaced. So talking about in detail about all these characteristics of this epithelial tissue, we may move further and discuss in detail. The first one we are discussing about in detail is the polarity. Now talking about the polarity, the cells have the polarity. You can say it may be of some different kind of charges also, and it may be some sort of pole also. And polarity is just the opposite surfaces. You can see that from very beginning, from the small classes, we are learning that the opposite poles or the opposite charges, these attract each other. And in this case also, when we are talking about the epithelial tissues, all cells have to combine and form the common structure. So for combining these surfaces, there have to be some sort of energy or sort of charge or anything which may attract each cell towards each other. So in case of when we are talking about the cells, the polarity in this case is not the charge, but it is the surface polarity, and it is basically of two types. The first surface is called as the apical surface, which is generally the upper and free side, which is exposed to the surface of the cavity. Likewise, when we talking about the skin, we can say that it is exposed, the apical surface is exposed to the surface or the external environment. And when we are talking about the lining of our intestine or lining of our digestive tracts, the apical surface may be exposed towards the cavity of the organ. And then most apical surfaces of these cells are smooth, but some of these have specialized finger-like projections called as the microvilli. As we discussed, that depending on type of cell and location of cells, various cells perform the different functions. So according to location of these cells, many of these apical surfaces may have the microvilli, which serves as for the purpose of the absorption. say for when we are talking about the internal lining of digestive tract, say in case of our intestines, the microvilli are being present, and they serve for the purpose of the absorption of the food which is being digested. And if we talk some other locations, like in case of the respiratory tract, it is also having some sort of various finger like projections, and that are called as the cilia and flagella. These basically help in propelling the things, or they help in movement of the things. And so depending on the location and structure of the cell and function of the cell, these accessory structures may also be present, but most of the apical surfaces of these epithelial tissues are smooth. Then the opposite polarity of this epithelial tissue is called as the basal surface. And as you can clearly see, that apical is the topmost part, and basal is the down or the basement part of the epithelial cells, and it is clearly understandable that it is the lower attached side, and it faces inwards and towards the body. And these basal surfaces, it basically serves as the purpose of binding these cells to the various other structures or various other type of tissues. And it serves this purpose with the help of the basic lamina, and it attaches to the basal lamina an adhesive sheet, as you might have seen when you apply some sort of stickers or other things. We have to apply some sort of adhesive, or you can say gum or favicol sort of thing, to attach that sticker or something to the other surface. So when we're talking about the human body and especially the tissues, it is having the basal lamina, which is a type of a sort of a sellotape sort of thing, or you may say that an adhesive sort of thing. And it is an adhesive sheet that holds the basal surface of the cells of the epithelium underlying cells. Or when we're talking about the connective tissue attachment, it may also serve as a purpose to attach to the connective tissue also. And both these surfaces different structure and function. As we are talking about these apical and the basal surfaces, that these serve for attachment purposes, apart from these epithelial tissues are also having the specialized contacts, as we already discussed, the epithelial tissues need to fit closely together. So they are having these specialized contacts, and many of the tissues, they are so closely bound to each other that they form the continuous sheets. And these specialized contact points, they bind the adjacent epithelial cells together with the help of the lateral contacts. And these lateral contacts may be having the tight junctions, which you might have studied in your cell chapter, and also the desmosomes. All these things you would have studied in your microbiology in the cell chapter. Now, as we discussed, that the epithelial tissues, and they are being provided the support from the connective tissue, and all these, we can see that all these epithelial sheets, these are being supported by connective tissue. And below these basal lamina, which we discussed, is a adhesive sheet. And below this basal lamina, there is the reticular lamina, and which is very deep to the basal lamina, and it consists of network of the collagen fibers, which we will be discussing in the connective tissue. And in combination to these, the basal lamina and the reticular lamina, we can say that a basement membrane is being formed, which is a combination of this reticular as well as the basal lamina. And this help in reinforces the epithelial sheet. sheet. It makes the epithelial sheet more strong. As you might have seen that a house is made, a very strong basement is being set up with the concrete and iron rods, etc., are being put up into this, and a reinforcement material is being formed. In that way only, this basal and the reticular lamina, they both combine to form the basement membrane, which in turn reinforces this epithelial sheet and prevents these attachment sheets from being apart, and it provides the resistance against the stretching and tearing, and defines the particular epithelial boundary. So here in this diagram you can see the apical surfaces and the basal surfaces of the two types of epithelial tissues, which are the simple and stratified. We will be discussing further in this chapter, and you can clearly see that a basal surface is being formed, and the upper dark surface, and below is a collagen fibers associated, which is somewhat light pink in color. And this basal surfaces, basal lamina and the reticular lamina, in combination they form the basement membrane. It is being clearly visible over here. And upper surface of the layer, it is the apical surface, as you can see. And apical surface and basal surface, and the reticular and the basal lamina, and in combination they form the basement membrane. Now discussing about the clinical factor of these epithelial cells, what problems may arise. We can discuss for example the cancerous epithelial cells, which are not contained by the basement membrane boundary, and when boundary is not there, you can easily understand that the cells they penetrate the boundary and invade the underlying tissues, resulting in spread of cancer. In this way the cancer is spread throughout the epithelial and connective tissues, and to various other parts of the body, as they are not comprised of and contained into the basement membrane. Now as we discuss the other characteristic, it was the avascular, that we said about, that it is not having any blood supply, but it is innervated. We can explain it is that no blood vessels are found in our epithelial tissue, so it must be nourished by the process of diffusion, which you already have studied. Your ma'am has taught you the various processes of diffusion. So it must be nourished by the diffusion from the underlying connective tissue, as it is directly connected to the connective tissues. And so by the process of diffusion, all the various nourishment factors are being transferred from connective tissue to the epithelial tissues. But as you can see, as you studied in your skin chapter, that it is comprised of various layers of cells. So as distance is the major factor, if cells are lying too far from the basement membrane, and they are not in direct contact with the connective tissues, the supply of blood or the nourishment is not being able to go much farther. Diffusion is limited. That's why we say, when we study in our skin chapter, that the superficial skin cells are dead on arrival, as they are epithelial cells of the skin or the epithelial tissues is already avascular, and they are not having any kind of blood supply to them, and being far apart from the connective tissue or the basement membrane, they are completely cut off or deprived from the nutrients or any other supplies, so they become dead, and the dead layer of this skin or epithelium is being continuously shed off and being replaced by the new dead cells which are lying underneath. So you can say that the epithelia or epithelial tissues, they are avascular, but they are innervated, and they are being supplied by the nerve fibers, because they have to serve as the first line defense or barrier or against the external environment, and they are prone to the touch receptors or any sort of thermoreceptors also. So the nerve fibers are being supplied to the epithelia, but there is no blood supply. Now talking about the next characteristics which we discussed is the regeneration. The epithelial cells have high regenerative capacities. This is because they are more prone to the loss, as when we talked about the skin also, that the upper layer is mostly the dead cells and they continuously shed on a daily basis. So the epithelial cells must have the high regenerative capacities, and it is also stimulated by the loss of apical basal polarity and broken lateral contacts. When the skin sheds off and the apical basal polarity, it may be disturbed. So both factors, whether the shedding of the cells or whether the apical or basal polarity is being into the epithelial tissues or epithelial cells, the regeneration process is being started. And some cells are exposed to friction and some to hostile substances, resulting in damage, as we talked about in case of the skin or the respiratory system or the digestive lining of the stomach. Then these are exposed to friction also, and hostile substances also, and to acid or hydrochloric acid also. So all these cells, they must be replaced and requires the adequate nutrients and cell division. Now these were the 5 characteristics of these epithelium tissue cells, and now we are gonna move further with the classification of the epithelium or the epithelia. As per the names, it is classified into the 2 number of cell layers. The first name of the epithelium, which is indicating the number of cells which is being present in the cell layers, how many cell layers are being present into the tissue, and they can be further denoted as the simple epithelia, which is having a very single layer, and but it is thick. That is called as the simple epithelia, having single layer of cells. And the second one is the stratified epithelia, which are having 2 or more layers, thick and involved in the protection function. It is called as the stratified epithelia, as you studied in your skin chapter, that it is comprised of the stratified epithelium. And the second name of the epithelial tissue is about the shape of the cells. It is combination. The epithelial tissues have 2 names. When we break down the epithelial tissue names, it is broken down into 2, and the first one, it is generally indicating or talking about the number of cell layers present in that epithelium, and the second one, which is indicating the shape of cells which are present in that epithelium. So it on the basis of the shape, it may be the squamous, which are flattened or scale like cells. It may be the cuboidal, which are the box like or the cube like structures of the cells. Then it may be the columnar, which are column like structures and are tall in shape. So in combination, we can form the various names like simple squamous epithelium, simple cuboidal epithelium. On breaking down these, we can clearly see that when we are talking about simple, it means generally it is comprised of 1 layer only, and when we are saying that it is simple cuboidal epithelium, then it denotes that simple means it is having the single layer, cuboidal means it is the single layer of cells which are present in that epithelium are cube like structures and cubic in shape. And it is clearly now understandable that simple cuboidal epithelium is a single layered and cube shaped cells being comprised in that particular epithelium. And when we talk about the complex structures, stratified columnar epithelium, then we can say that it is the tissue which is we are talking about is having the many layers of cells, and basically the cells of that many layers are being formed through the columnar stratified columnar epithelium. When we're talking, we can say that the cells are basically comprised of the columnar structures. One thing to keep in mind, Then when we are talking about the stratified epithelia, the shape can vary in each layer, as it is having the multiple layers. The shape can vary in each layer. So the tissue, basically, when we are talking about the stratified epithelia, the tissue is named according to the cell shape in apical layers. Say for example, when we are talking about the stratified cuboidal epithelium, and it may also have the columnar cells, the squamous cells, all type of cells may be present in the stratified epithelium. But when we are saying that stratified columnar epithelium, then it means that that particular epithelium is having different layers of cells, but the apical layer of the cell, the topmost layer of the tissue, and that is composed of the columnar cell. So always when you have to name a particular type of tissue, the apical layer of cells which is present, you have to nominate that cells to define a particular tissue. As we can see in this diagram, we can see that upper one, as we discussed earlier, is the example of the simple, and below one is the example of the stratified epithelium. And upper simple one is having only single layer, and the below the stratified is having the multi-layer. So when we are naming about these stratified epithelium, we have to keep in mind that what sort of cells it is having in its apical surface. Below it may be having any sort of cell that may be columnar, cuboidal, or any sort of things. If it is having the upper layer of flat cells, so we have to denote it as per the upper layer only, not what all type of cells it is having in the basal surface or the medial surface of. Looking into this diagram, we can clearly see that the flat layered cells, they are called as the squamous cells, and they may appear in the diagram like this. And then we can say that the cuboidal cells, they are cube shaped, and this may appear in the diagram like this. And then the columnar cells, which may appear in the diagram like this. Now, talking about the simple epithelia, as we already discussed, which is involved in the absorption, secretion, or filtration processes, the first classification of it is the simple squamous epithelium. As you may understand from the word itself, it is simple, single-layered, squamous, flat layer cells epithelium. So the cells are flattened laterally, and cytoplasm is very sparse in this, and these mostly function and are present where rapid diffusion is the priority. For example, we can say that in kidney and in lungs, where diffusion process is the main priority. And the two special type of simple squamous epithelia are based on the locations. They are the endothelium. As we talked earlier, it is forming the inner lining of the vessels. So we can see that endothelium is mainly found in the lining of the lymphatic vessels, the blood vessels, and the heart. You must have studied all this in your cardiovascular system. And the second, on the basis of the location, it is called as the mesothelium, which is present in the serous. As we can see in this diagram, it is the simple squamous epithelium, and in this picture we can see that these are the simple squamous epithelium, which is forming the part of the alveolar walls, or we can say that the air sacs, which help in diffusion of the gases from lungs to the bloods, which you studied in your cardiovascular system, the type of circulations you were studying. At that time you might have studied the pulmonary circulation, and this is the magnification of the alveolar sacs, and this is mainly comprised of the simple squamous epithelium. As we discussed, it allows the materials to pass by diffusion and filtration in sites where protection is not important, and it also serves as the lubricating purposes, so it makes the air moist. And secondly, it helps in diffusion of the gases, and it may be found in the kidney glomerulus, and As we are seeing here, the air sacs of the lungs. It may be found in the lining of the heart, blood vessels, lymphatic vessels, or a ventral body cavity. Talking about the simple cuboidal epithelium, it is the single layer of cuboidal shaped cells, and it is generally involved in the process of secretion and absorption, and it forms the walls of smallest ducts of glands and many kidney tubules, where the process of secretion and absorption is being carried out. If you look at here in a diagram, you can see it is a single layer of cube-like cells with a large spherical central nuclei. The nuclei, you can see, is very large, and the main function of them is the secretion and absorption, and location is mainly the kidney tubules, ducts, and secretory portions of small glands or the ovary surface. And this picture which you are seeing, the magnified pictures, it is of the simple cuboidal epithelium found in the kidney tubules, and you can clearly see the simple cuboidal epithelial cells being denoted over here, and a large nucleus is being placed in that, and in between you can see the basement membrane, and sideline you can see the connective tissues. Also talking about the simple columnar epithelium, it is the single layer of the tall closely packed cells, and some of these cells, as we discussed earlier, have microvilli, and some have the cilia, and some layers contain the mucus secreting goblet cells, which you have might studied in your cell chapter also, and in I think skin chapter also. And generally when we are talking about the functions of these cells, they are involved in the absorption and secretion of mucus, enzymes, and other substances. And cilia, as we discussed earlier, which are present in these cells, the apical layer of these cells, it helps in movement of the mucus, and it is mainly found in the digestive tract, gallbladder, ducts of some glands, and bronchi, and the uterine tube. You can see that it is a single layer of tall cells with a round to oval nuclei, and some of the cells, as we discussed, may contain the microvilli, and some may contain the cilia, and some may also contain the goblet cells, and their function, as you can clearly see, is the absorption, secretion of mucus, enzymes, and other substances. And ciliated type cells which are there, they propels the mucus or the reproductive cells, especially when we are talking about the female reproductive system. They help in movement of the ovum by the ciliary action, and location of these are basically on the form of ciliated or non-ciliated forms, and non-ciliated types are found in the lines of most of the digestive tract, gallbladder, and excretory ducts of the some gland, and the ciliated of this type is found in the lining of the small bronchi, uterine tubes, and also some regions of the uterus. And in here the picture, you can say it is of the small intestine mucosal layer, and you can clearly see that above layer it is composed of the microvilli, and down below you can clearly see the simple columnar epithelial cells, and also you can see after a set of cuboidal cells, one goblet cell is also being present in here, which helps in secretion of the mucus. After all these types, one more type is there, which is called as a pseudostratified columnar epithelium, and pseudo word in itself, it means the false. So when we break down this word, it is pseudo stratified, means that false appearing stratified columnar epithelium, means that the cells may vary in height and appear to be multi-layered and stratified, but tissue is in fact having the single layered simple epithelium, and it just appears to be multi-layered, but it is in reality it is the simple epithelium. It appears to be multi-layered due to the variation in the height of the cells which are being contained in that epithelium, So in this type of pseudostratified columnar epitheliums, many of the cells, they are the ciliated cells, and it is generally involved in secretion, particularly of the mucus, and also the movement of mucus via the ciliary sweeping action, and it is located mostly in the upper respiratory tract and ducts of the large glands and tubules which are present in the testes of the male reproductive organ. This diagram, that it is a single layer of cells, but all the cells are having the difference in their heights, and some are reaching to the surface, and some of them you can see are not able to reach the surface. So they appear to be multi-layered, but in fact, when we see closely, it is the single layer of cells, but having the variation in their heights and function. As we already discussed, it helps in secretion of substances, particularly the mucus, the propulsion of mucus by the ciliary action. And location also we discussed, it is non-ciliated types which are found mostly in the male sperm carrying ducts and ducts of the large glands, and ciliated varieties of these which are found in the lines of the trachea and most of the upper respiratory tract. And in this picture you can clearly see it is the human trachea epithelium, and it is pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium. You can clearly see over here the cilia is being present, and the epithelial layer, all the cells are not of same height and same size. Some of them are reaching up to the height, and some are not able to reach the height, and basement membrane they are having in common. And some goblet cells also are being present, which we already discussed, helping to secrete the mucus. So you can clearly see over here that they are unevenly placed, and they appear to be multi-layered, but in fact when we talk, they are a single layer cell, so they are being named as pseudo-stratified ciliated columnar epithelium. So moving on forwards to the stratified epithelial tissues, till now we were discussing about the simple single layered tissues. Now we are moving forward to the multi-layered and stratified epithelial tissues. These involve two or more layer of cells, and new cells, as they are having the multi-layered cells. So the new cells which regenerate, they regenerate from the below, and the basal cells of these epithelium, they divide and migrate towards the surface, pushing the upper cells more upwards, and they are more durable than the simple epithelia because protection is their major role, and they have to form the first line defense barrier. So talking about in further, first type is the stratified squamous epithelium, as we discussed earlier how we are naming them. So clearly it is here that it is stratified multilayered squamous flattened like cells epithelium, and most widespread of stratified epithelia is the stratified squamous epithelium, and it is found in free surfaces squamous with deeper cuboidal or columnar cells. As we discussed earlier, we are naming the stratified epithelium on the basis of what type of cells are present on the apical surface of this epithelium. So below the apical surface towards the basal surface, it may have any sort of cells, that doesn't matter, but the apical surface cells does matter. So this type of tissue or epithelium, they generally have the free surface is the squamous, and with deeper they may have the cuboidal or the columnar layers, and it is located in areas of high wear and tear. We can say skin, which is at most exposed to the wear and tear, and keratinized cells are being found in skin, and non-keratinized cells are found in the moist linings, wherever they serve the purpose of moistening the layers. At that linings, it is forming the non-keratinized cells, and whereas dry surface is required, they are forming the keratinized cells. As I say, for example, we can talk about it in skin, that it is the thick membrane which is composed of several cell layers. The basal layer is having, you can clearly see the cuboidal or the columnar and metabolically activated cells, and surface cells, which in return you can clearly see are the flattened cell or the squamous cells. In the keratinized type, the surface cells are full of keratin and dead cells, and basal cells are active in mitosis and produce cells of more superficial layers. And as we discussed earlier, their function is that it protects underlying tissues in areas subjected to abrasion. And location also, we has already discussed, it is forming the moist linings of our digestive tract, and then we're talking about esophagus, mouth, and the reproductive tract linings are also formed by these. And the keratinized variety, they forms the epidermis of the skin, which you studied in your skin chapter. And in this picture, you can clearly see the stratified squamous epithelium, which is lining the esophagus. And you can see various types of cells are being found in this, but the upper layer of skin, the upper layer of the tissue layer, which you see over here, is basically, it is comprised of the flat squamous cells. So it is called as the stratified squamous epithelium. Now moving forward to the stratified epithelial tissues, we are going to discuss about the stratified cuboidal epithelium. And it is very rare to find this tissue in a human body, and it is found in some sweat and mammary glands only, and it is typically only 2 cell layers thick. It is only of the 2 layers. And then we talk about the stratified columnar epithelium. It is also very limited in our human body, and small amounts of this type of epithelium is being found in the pharynx, in the male urethra, and lining of some glandular ducts. And usually it occurs at the transition areas where 2 or other types of epithelia are being joined or being in a transition phase, and only apical layer of this type of epithelium is columnar. This diagram, now moving forward, we are discussing the transitional epithelium. As we discussed, it is transitional. You can understand from the word itself, it is not in a particular single state. It is able to change its states. That's why it is called as the transitional epithelium. And it generally forms the lining of the hollow urinary organs, and it is found in bladder, ureters, and urethra, because their main function is expansion and contraction. And you can see when our bladder is empty, it comes to a small shape, and as it gets filled up, it is increasing in size. So the cells have to change their shape accordingly, and their function has to be expansion and relaxation. So they have to change their shapes. The cells have to change their shapes continuously, so they are termed as the transitional epithelium. And the basal layer cells are cuboidal or columnar. And ability of these cells, when we talk, they are having the ability to change the shape when stretched, to allow increased flow of urine, and in case of bladder, it also helps in increasing the storage space for urine. In this diagram, you can clearly see that this transitional epithelium, it mainly resembles both the stratified squamous and the stratified cuboidal epitheliums. You can see over here the cells are having the shapes of both the squamous and the cuboidal cells, and the basal cells, cuboidal or columnar, and the surface cells are dome shaped or squamous like, depending on degree which the organ is being stretched. They continuously change the shapes, and their function, as we already discussed, is to stretches and permits storage of urine to distend the urinary organs, and it is mainly found in the lines of ureters, bladder, and part of the urethra. So as we see in this picture, you can clearly see the basement membrane over here, and lying is the connective tissue, and above the transitional epithelium, which we are talking, it is lining the bladder, and it's the bulb like structures are being formed, and as they are stretched uh, and extended, they form the simple squamous type tissues. So we can say that this is the transitional epithelium, which is changing the shape of the cells, which is continuously changing. Moving forwards, we find the glandular epithelium, or the commonly called as the glands. We can see that they are one or more cells that makes and secretes an aqueous fluid, which is called as the secretion, and they can be classified by the site of product they release. For example, we can say that endocrine or endocrine glands, you can see clearly that they are internally secreting, for example, you can say the hormones which are secreted inside the body, and the exocrine function when they are externally secreting, likewise we said that sweat or the oil glands. Relative number of cells which are forming the gland, they are the unicellular. Likewise, we discussed previously the goblet cells, which were helping in the mucus secretion, or they may be the multicellular, like an example for the salivary glands. So they can be both the unicellular or multicellular. Now, talking about in detail about these exocrine and endocrine glands, the exocrine, when we talked about the secretions are released onto the body surfaces, such as skin or into the body cavities, and they are more numerous than the endocrine glands, and they secrete the products into the ducts. Particular ducts are being formed for them, and they secrete their products into that duct only. And examples of these are, you can say, the mucus, sweat, oil, and salivary glands, and as we discussed earlier, they can be unicellular or the multicellular. Whereas when we talk about the endocrine glands, these are the ductless glands. They do not have any kind of ducts present for their secretions, and the secretions of these are not released into duct and are released into the surrounding the interstitial fluid. Whatever kind of interstitial fluid is being present around them, they secrete their secretions into them, and which is picked up by the circulatory system and is rendered to the target area, and these secrete by the process of exocytosis. They secrete the hormones, which are generally a messenger chemicals that travel through the lymph or blood to their specific target organs, and target organs in return respond in some characteristic way to these hormones, which we will be studying in your endocrine system in detail. Now the unicellular exocrine glands, which we talked about, is the only important unicellular glands which are present in a human body are the mucous cells and the goblet cells, and these are found in the epithelial linings of the intestinal and respiratory tracts. And all of these unicellular exocrine glands, they produce the mucin, a sugar protein that can be dissolved into water to form the mucus, a slimy, protective, and lubricating, coating like substance. So these are the glands which keep our lining of our respiratory tract and our digestive tract moist, and in return they provide the protection and lubrication to organ systems of our respiratory and digestive system. Now you can clearly see over here in the diagram, it is of the goblet cell, and which is the unicellular exocrine gland, as we discussed earlier. So it is having the secretory vesicles, which is filled up of the mucin, and mucin in return, when it comes to the surface, it turns into the mucus, and at the surface you can clearly see over here the microvilli are present, and they help in the movement of this mucus from one place to another. Now talking about the multicellular exocrine glands, as you can say, it is multicellular, composed of more than one cells. So multicellular exocrine glands are composed of duct and a secretory unit. Like we saw in the goblet cell, it is called as the secretory unit, and one more type of structure that called as duct is present in these multicellular exocrine glands, in which the secretion of that particular gland is being secreted. So it is usually surrounded by a supportive connective tissue that supplies blood and nerve fibers to the gland, and the connective tissue can form a capsule around the gland and also extend into the gland, dividing into various lobes. And as per these things only, these multicellular exocrine glands can be classified by the structure and mode of secretion. Talking about the structure of these multicellular exocrine glands, you can take it for first. You can say it is a simple exocrine glands which have unbranched ducts, but compound glands have the branched ducts. In tubular gland, you can see the secretory cells form a duct, whereas in alveolar gland, secretory cells form the sacs. When we discussed in our respiratory air sacs, we were discussing, in that case, they form the sacs, and whereas in tubular gland, they form the duct in which the particular secretion is being secreted. And as you can clearly see, when you break down these words, it is tubulo and it is alveolar. Means it is having both kinds, the tubular also and the alveolar also, and they have both types of these exocrine glands. So now, as you can see in this diagram, we are seeing the tubular secretory structure and the alveolar secretory structures. In these, we can divide it into the simple duct structure and the ducts which is not having any kind of branches. So it may be divided into that simple tubular, which is present in our intestinal glands. You can see that a single tube is being present, and then it is termed as a simple branched tubular. You can see over here it is having the three branches, which is present in your stomach, say for the gastric glands, which is secreting the gastric juices. Whereas in turn, when we're talking about the compound structures, they are having the duct branches. In these, we were having the common duct, single ducts, and in compound duct structure, we are having different ducts, and which are further having the branches, and for the tubes are being spread all over these branches. So you can clearly see over here that it is having the three duct branches, and further tubular structures are being spread throughout these three branches. Example of these is the duodenal gland of your small intestine. And then we talk about the alveolar secretory structure. It is same way, it is being confirmed and defined as the simple and the compound structures. And in this, you can see the simple alveolar, it is not having any branches. It is a simple, and but it is not present in our human beings, so no example for the human being, sorry. And then we have simple branched alveolar structures, which are present in our sebaceous glands, which secrete the oil in our skin. So you can clearly see that it is having three branches. And talking about the compound structures, we can clearly see that compound alveolar, which are present in our mammary gland, they are having the branches and further subdivisions in the branches. And then when we talk about the compound tubulo-alveolar present in the salivary glands, you can see over here It is having a compound structure comprising of the tubules as well as the alveolar structure. Now the multicellular exocrine glands, they can also be classified on the basis of the mode of secretion, and the mode of secretion is basically the first when we talk about it as merocrine, and most of the secretory products are being secreted by the process of exocytosis as secretions. And the best example of this is you can say the sweat and the pancreas, which secrete by the process of exocytosis, and it is called as the merocrine. Then comes the holocrine secretion. It is a process in which accumulation of the products take place within that gland, and when the product is accumulated beyond the limited capacity, it then ruptures. So holocrine is a process when accumulation of the product is taking place within that particular gland, and then it ruptures to secrete the secretion present in that. And then we can talk about the apocrine secretions, which is the accumulation of products are within, but only apex layer of this gland ruptures. Whether this type exists in humans or not, it is still the controversial in nature, as no practical evidence has been still being found. But some of the authors may assume that the memory cells of our human beings, they are apocrine in nature. But till now, if we talk about the sure things, only merocrine and holocrine glands are being present in the humans, which are being confined and being confirmed. Apocrine is still a matter of controversy. Now you can clearly see in this diagram that the merocrine glands, they generally secrete their products by the process of exocytosis. You can clearly see the secretion is being secreted into the empty structure, and by process of exocytosis it is being sent outwards. Whereas you see in second in holocrine glands, the entire secretory cell ruptures. You can clearly see the cell is being ruptured and releasing the secretions and the dead cell fragments. So it is called as the holocrine glands. Now students, this was all about the epithelial tissue. The lecture has gone very long, so we will be discussing the next of our tissue in our next lecture. So basically we have completed the epithelial tissue, and you can clearly see in this diagram which I am showing on your screen, the complete summary of your epithelial tissue is being shown over here. You can take it for the reference, and also it is very helpful for your exams. When if asked about the epithelial tissue, you can score easily very good marks when you know this diagram. And also for the exam purpose, when you have to summarize the epithelial tissue, you can have this in mind, and clearly you can summarize the epithelial tissue. Thanks for watching this lecture. We will meet and continue the further of our tissue types in our next lecture. Thank you.